My uncle called me last Tuesday night. He is 61 years old. He has used Windows every single day since 1995. He is the kind of man who prints his emails, who keeps a physical notebook next to his keyboard, who once called me in a panic because his desktop icons had rearranged themselves after an update. 60 days ago, I installed Linux on his laptop. And last Tuesday, after 2 full months of using it alone, without me hovering over his shoulder, he asked me one question, a question I genuinely did not have a good answer for. He said, "Why didn't anyone tell me about this 10 years ago?" And that question has been sitting in my chest ever since. Because the honest answer is uncomfortable. Nobody told him because for decades the technology industry had a financial incentive to make sure people like my uncle never even considered the alternative. But something has changed. Something big enough that 2 brothers in Dublin, Ireland and I will tell you their story later in this video, because it is remarkable built a free operating system that has been downloaded over 2 million times in under 3 months. And more than 3/4 of those downloads came from Windows machines. This is not a story about software. This is a story about what happens when a corporation decides that the people who built its empire are no longer worth keeping. Here is the number that should concern every Windows user watching this. According to research from the analyst firm Canalys, approximately 240 million personal computers worldwide cannot be upgraded to Windows 11. Not because they are broken, not because they are slow, because Microsoft drew a line in the sand with hardware requirements, a specific security chip called TPM 2.0, specific processor generations, specific firmware standards, and roughly 1/5 of every Windows computer on Earth fell on the wrong side of that line. Canalys put it in terms that are hard to forget. If those 240 million machines were all folded laptops stacked on top of each other, the pile would stretch 600 kilometers past the moon. The electronic waste from those computers could weigh an estimated 480 million kilograms. That is the equivalent of 320,000 cars sent to a landfill. Not because the machines stopped working, because one company decided they were no longer eligible. Microsoft ended mainstream support for Windows 10 on October 14, 2025. From that date forward, no more free security updates, no more feature patches, no more routine technical support. If you wanted to keep your machine protected, Microsoft offered 3 choices. Upgrade to Windows 11 if your hardware qualifies. Pay $30 for a single year of extended security updates that expire in October 2026, with no renewal option for consumers. Or buy a brand new computer. For millions of people, including my uncle, none of those options felt acceptable. His 5-year-old laptop ran perfectly. It was fast enough. It did everything he needed. But Microsoft had declared it obsolete. And here is the part that made my uncle genuinely angry, which I will come back to shortly. The $30 extended support offer was not just a lifeline. It came with strings attached that most people never read. Meanwhile, the Linux desktop market has been growing at a pace that surprised even its own advocates. StatCounter recorded Linux at just under 3% of the global desktop market as of early 2026. That may sound small, but put it in context. The United States crossed 5% Linux desktop share for the first time in June of 2025. Steam, the largest PC gaming platform in the world, recorded Linux at 5.33% of its active users in March of 2026, the highest gaming share ever measured on the platform. These are not projections. These are measured numbers, and they are accelerating. But raw market share does not tell the real story. The real story is who is switching. And that brings us to the 2 brothers in Dublin, whose operating system became the unexpected escape hatch for millions of people, just like my uncle. To understand why this is happening now, you need to understand what Microsoft has been building toward for years. When Windows 11 launched in late 2021, it arrived with a set of hardware requirements that were unlike anything Microsoft had ever imposed on a consumer operating system. Previous versions of Windows had always been generous. Windows 10 ran on practically anything. It was Microsoft's great unifier. the version that was supposed to be the last one you would ever need, given away free to encourage the widest possible adoption. And it worked. Windows 10 became the most widely installed operating system in history. But Windows 11 changed the terms. To install it with Microsoft's blessing, your computer needed a TPM 2.0 security chip, UEFI secure boot, and a processor from a supported generation, at minimum 8th generation. Intel Core or AMD Ryzen 2000 series. Machines older than roughly 2018 were in many cases simply locked out. Microsoft said this was about security. And there is a legitimate security argument for modern hardware baselines. But critics pointed out that the timing aligned with something else entirely. Microsoft was in the middle of a massive strategic pivot toward artificial intelligence. Satya Nadella's Microsoft was betting its future on Copilot, an AI assistant woven into Windows, Office, Edge, and virtually every product the company makes. The new Copilot Plus PCs, announced in 2024, required dedicated neural processing hardware. The more users Microsoft could push onto new machines, the faster that AI ecosystem would grow. And then came Recall. Announced in May of 2024, Recall was designed to be an AI-powered photographic memory for your computer. It would take screenshots of everything you did, every few seconds, and let you search back through your own activity using natural language. Security researchers were alarmed almost immediately. The feature captured private messages, banking details, medical records, passwords, everything visible on screen, stored in a local database. Microsoft had originally planned to enable it by default. After fierce backlash, the company delayed Recall multiple times, eventually making it opt-in and adding encryption protections. But the damage to trust was already done. At the same time, Windows 11's Start menu, the front door of the operating system, began filling with advertisements. The Recommended section, which once showed your recent files and frequently used applications, started promoting third-party apps from the Microsoft Store. New installations pinned shortcuts for services like TikTok and Spotify without the user's permission. To many longtime Windows users, it felt like the operating system they had paid for was being turned into a billboard. This is the environment my uncle was living in when his Windows 10 machine started showing him full-screen pop-ups urging him to buy a Copilot Plus PC. Not a subtle notification in the corner, a full-screen interruption embedded in the operating system itself, blurring a security warning with a hardware sales pitch. That was the moment he called me and said he was done. But what happened next, and what it reveals about the direction of this entire industry, is even more important. October 14th, 2025 was the day everything changed. Not because something dramatic happened, because something stopped. The updates stopped. The safety net disappeared, and hundreds of millions of computers were suddenly running an operating system that no longer had a vendor standing behind it. For enterprise customers, Microsoft offered extended security updates through a volume licensing program at $61 per device for the first year. That price doubles every consecutive year for up to 3 years. For a business with 500 older machines, the first year alone would cost over $30,000. The second year, double that. The third year, double again. For individual consumers, the offer was simpler, but arguably more revealing. $30 for 1 year of security patches. No second year available. And one of the enrollment options required you to sync your PC settings through a Microsoft account, essentially trading your data and telemetry for the right to remain protected. Microsoft framed this as convenience. Many users saw it as coercion. Zorin OS 18 launched in October of 2025. The timing was deliberate. Within 5 weeks, it crossed 1 million downloads. The Zorin development team reported that over 78% of those downloads came from Windows machines. By January of 2026, the number had reached 2 million downloads in under 3 months. No Linux distribution designed for desktop consumers had ever grown that fast. Linux Mint, Ubuntu, and several other distributions also saw significant spikes in download activity during the same period. But Zorin became the symbol of the migration because it was explicitly designed for one purpose: to make Windows users feel at home from the first moment they saw the desktop. It looks like Windows, it behaves like Windows, and it runs on precisely the kind of older hardware that Microsoft had declared unworthy of Windows 11. My uncle's laptop, a perfectly functional machine with an older Intel processor and no TPM 2.0 chip, went from a device Microsoft wanted to send to a landfill to a machine that boots faster, runs quieter, and receives free security updates for years to come. All because of a free operating system built by two brothers who started coding as teenagers. And the story of how they got here is one of the most quietly extraordinary things happening in technology right now. The migration away from Windows 10 did not happen in a vacuum. It happened at the same moment that trust in Microsoft's direction was eroding on multiple fronts. In March of 2026, reports emerged that Microsoft was beginning to scale back some of the most aggressive promotional elements inside Windows 11. The company appeared to acknowledge, at least partially, that embedding advertising into the Start menu, the notification system, the lock screen, and even File Explorer had crossed a line. Users had reported accidentally clicking on promotions when trying to reach their own files. Enterprise IT administrators were fielding support calls from employees who had inadvertently signed up for services through promotional pop-ups on corporate devices. The backlash was real, widespread, and it was not coming from Linux enthusiasts. It was coming from ordinary people who simply wanted their computer to work the way it used to. Around the same time, How To Geek, one of the most widely read technology publications, ran a piece with a headline that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. It said simply that Microsoft had lost the plot and listed 5 Windows features that nobody had asked for. Recall was at the top. Start menu ads were right behind it. The article resonated because it said out loud what millions of users were feeling privately. The environmental dimension of this story continued to grow as well. Canalys had warned as early as 2023 that Windows 10's end of support would trigger the largest wave of PC-related electronic waste in history. By late 2025, environmental groups and technology advocates were pointing out that lightweight Linux distributions could extend the useful life of these machines by years, reducing both waste and the financial burden on consumers who could not afford new hardware. Schools in developing countries, community centers, families on fixed incomes, the people who could least afford to replace a working computer were the ones being asked to do it. And that brings us to the part of this story that has stayed with me most: the human cost. What it actually looks and feels like when someone who has used the same kind of computer for 30 years is told, without any real explanation they can understand, that their machine is no longer good enough. My uncle is a retired electrician. He uses his computer for email, for reading the news, for video calls with his grandchildren, and for managing a small spreadsheet where he tracks his monthly expenses. He is not a power user. He is not a gamer. He does not edit video or run complex software. He is exactly the kind of person Windows was built for. When the full-screen upgrade prompt started appearing on his Windows 10 desktop in late 2024, he did not understand what they meant. He thought his computer was broken. He called me and said something was wrong because his screen kept being taken over by messages he did not recognize. When I explained that Microsoft was telling him to buy a new computer, he was confused. His laptop worked fine. Why would he need a new one? When I told him his machine could not run Windows 11 because it lacked a specific security chip, he asked me what a TPM was. I tried to explain it. He listened politely. Then he said, "So my computer is fine, but they will not let me use it anymore?" That is not technically accurate. He could keep using Windows 10, but without security updates, connecting that machine to the internet becomes increasingly risky with every passing month. He understood that much. He just could not accept the logic of it. I installed Zorin OS on his laptop on a Saturday afternoon. The entire process took about 40 minutes. When the desktop appeared, he looked at it and said, "That looks like Windows." I showed him the web browser. I showed him the file manager. I showed him how to open his email. Within 10 minutes, he was navigating on his own. Within a week, he had stopped calling me with questions. Within a month, he told me his laptop felt faster than it had in years. And then came that phone call at the 60-day mark. Why didn't anyone tell me about this 10 years ago? That question is not really about Linux. It is about the entire structure of the consumer technology industry, an industry that profits when people replace things that still work, and that has very little incentive to tell you that free, high-quality alternatives exist. My uncle is one person, but he represents millions. Zorin's own data shows that more than 780,000 of its downloads in that first wave came directly from Windows machines. Each one of those downloads represents someone who went looking for an answer that Microsoft was not willing to give them. And the remarkable thing is that the answer was built by two brothers, Artyom and Kirill Zorin, who started Zorin OS in 2008 in Dublin, Ireland. They were 12 and 14 years old. Their parents were Ukrainian immigrants. Their father was a translator. Their mother was an artist. There were no programmers in the family. The brothers taught themselves to code from books and YouTube tutorials. And the entire project began because their father tried Linux, found it too confusing, and told his sons that someone needed to make it feel more like Windows. That complaint became a company. That company's operating system is now the fastest growing desktop Linux distribution in the world. Now, I want to be honest about this, because I respect the people watching this channel enough to give both sides. Linux is not perfect. It is not a magic solution that works for every person in every situation. There are real trade-offs. If you depend on specific professional software, certain versions of Adobe Creative Suite, specialized accounting programs, some enterprise applications, there may not be a native Linux version. Compatibility layers have improved enormously, but they are not seamless for everything. If you are a heavy gamer, the situation is dramatically better thanks to Valve's Proton compatibility layer and the Steam Deck. But there are still titles that require extra configuration. And there will be moments where you encounter unfamiliar dialog boxes or need to search for a solution online. These are real limitations, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. My uncle does not know any of that. He just knows that his laptop works again, that it is fast, that it is quiet, that nobody is trying to sell him anything when he opens his start menu, and that for the first time in 30 years of owning a computer, he does not feel like the product. In the next video, I am going to walk through the exact process I used to set up my uncle's machine, step by step, from downloading the operating system to the moment the desktop appears, so that anyone watching this can do the same thing for themselves or for someone they care about. No jargon, no assumptions, just the clearest guide I can build. If this video helped you understand what is happening right now in the world of desktop computing and why it matters, I would genuinely appreciate it if you subscribed. Not because I need the numbers, but because this story is not over. Microsoft is making moves, Linux is making moves, and the decisions that get made in the next 12 months will affect every single person who sits down in front of a computer. I want to make sure you hear about those decisions from someone who will tell you the truth, even when the truth is complicated. My uncle asked me one question I was not ready for, but I think the better question, the one all of us should be asking, is this. How many people out there are still using machines that work perfectly, being told by a company they have trusted for decades that those machines are not good enough anymore? And what happens when those people finally discover they have a choice?